By the 1400s, a knight in full plate was tough to hurt with a sword. So fighters leaned on a weapon built for one problem: beating armor. The medieval poleaxe packs an axe edge, a hammer face, and a spike onto one short, solid haft, made to dent plate, control an opponent, and threaten the gaps where armor has to move. Let's break down how it works, why it became a favorite in armored foot combat, and what the real fight manuals reveal. Number 1. Armor changes the rules. Plate armor is the reason the poleaxe exists. In early medieval Europe, a lot of fighting was built around mail, interlinked iron rings worn over padding, plus a shield. Mail is tough against slashing cuts, but it can be beaten with hard thrusts, heavy impact, or by getting around the shield. By the 1200s and 1300s, armor makers started adding more and more solid plates over the chest, shoulders, arms, and legs. It wasn't an overnight switch. It moved through stages like coat of plates and brigandines, plates riveted inside a fabric or leather jacket, before you get the full harness of shaped steel plates that people picture on late medieval knights. Once full plate becomes common in the 1400s, a basic problem shows up on every battlefield. Many classic weapons don't do much to it. A sword cut that would slice through clothing and bite deep into flesh usually just skates off a curved breastplate. Even a strong hit can glance away because good armor is built to deflect. And plate armor isn't necessarily the slow, clunky, tin can stereotype. A well-fitted harness spreads its weight over the whole body, so an athletic fighter can still move, sprint short distances, wrestle, and keep balance. That mobility matters because it means you can't count on a slow target. You need a weapon that still works when the other person can slip, brace, and respond. That doesn't mean armored fighters were invincible, far from it. But it means the old idea of land a clean cut and the fight is over stops being reliable against high-end protection. So tactics shift. Fighters start looking for three things: leverage, concentrated force, and access to weak spots. Leverage is why long weapons stay popular. Anything on a pole gives you reach and mechanical advantage. Concentrated force is why you see more hammers, spikes, and narrow points. The smaller the contact area, the more pressure you can put into a plate. And weak spots are the unavoidable gaps at joints and openings, places that have to flex, let you breathe, and let you see. That arms and armor arms race sets up the poleaxe perfectly. It's not a peasant tool grabbed in a hurry. It's a purpose-built answer to a world where well-equipped soldiers are wrapped in steel and where close-range fighting on foot is common. When people call it built to beat armor, that's not hype. It's describing the whole design philosophy. Beat the plate, threaten the gaps, and keep working when the fight turns into a pushing, grabbing, exhausting struggle. Another late medieval twist is economics. A fully armored man-at-arms is valuable. In many wars, taking him alive for ransom is a real incentive, so weapons that can control and disable matter as much as weapons meant to finish a fight fast. Number 2, what a poleaxe really is. Despite the name, a medieval poleaxe is not the same thing as the wood-cutting axe in a shed. The word is confusing because pole here means the shaft or haft, not a pole like a flagpole. You'll also see the spelling poleaxe, especially in English sources. In French, it's often treated as a knightly axe of arms. Whatever the spelling, we're talking about a relatively short pole weapon, usually somewhere around chest-to-head height, made for fighting another armored person at close range. A typical poleaxe head is a compact set of tools clustered together.
On one side, you often have an axe blade. On the other side, there's commonly a hammer face or a beak, an aggressive, curved spike, sometimes compared to a bird's beak. On top, there's usually a straight spike for thrusting. At the bottom end of the shaft, there is often a metal butt spike. So you have striking surfaces, hooking surfaces, and thrusting points all in one. The details vary a lot, and that's part of the story. Some poleaxes lean heavily toward blunt force, with a hammer and a beak, but only a small cutting edge. Others have a broad axe blade, because the owner expected to face mixed armor levels. Some are built with a long socket, some with short sockets plus langets. And in certain contexts, especially controlled foot combats, you even see all-metal poleaxes, where much of the shaft is reinforced or made of steel, because durability matters more than weight. Two extra features matter because they show how professional the weapon is. First are langets, metal strips that run down the sides of the wooden shaft from the head. Their job is to stop an opponent's blade from chewing into the wood and snapping your weapon. Second are rondels, round guard plates placed on the shaft, often near the hands. They act like basic hand protection and help with grip control when armor, gloves, and sweat make everything slippery. Compared to a battlefield halberd, the poleaxe is usually shorter, stiffer, and more balanced for one-on-one or small group fighting. A halberd is an infantry weapon built for formation work, with longer reach and a broader head. The poleaxe is more like a knight's personal polearm. It has reach, but it's tuned for tight distances, weapon binds, and quick changes from hit to thrust to control. Number 3. The anti-armor toolkit. The poleaxe beats armor by doing what armor hates, delivering force in a way that's hard to spread out. Think about a flat sword cut. The edge can be sharp, but when it hits a hard, curved plate, the energy spreads and the blade often slips. Armor makers deliberately shaped breastplates and helmets with rounded surfaces and ridges because those shapes shed blows. A poleaxe flips that situation. It gives you a stiff lever, and it often gives you a small impact surface that doesn't want to slide away. The hammer side is the clearest example. A hammer face can dent plates, and even when it doesn't break through, the shock still goes into the body under the armor. Medieval armor isn't just steel. It's steel over padding, over a human skeleton. A big impact can rattle you, knock the wind out, or injure through blunt force. That's one reason maces and warhammers stay relevant in the late Middle Ages, even when edged weapons look cooler in art. The beak, or pick side, pushes the idea further. Instead of a broad impact, you get a narrow point. A narrow point is good at biting into plate, threatening the edges of plates, and forcing the opponent to respect angles and distance. It also works psychologically in a very practical way. An armored fighter can take some glancing hits and keep going, but a spike makes every mistake feel expensive. Then there's the top spike. A straight spike turns the poleaxe into a short spear that's strong enough for armored contact. Thrusts matter in armored fighting because openings matter. Plate has to bend at joints, so the armor maker uses overlaps, sliding rivets, and mail inserts. But those solutions still create lines and openings. A spike is a direct way to threaten those places without relying on a cut. The axe blade is the part people focus on, but it's not always the main armor breaker. Against good plate, a clean chop is less likely to slice through. The blade matters more for striking at edges, catching and dragging, and dealing with opponents in lighter gear. In real warfare, not everyone is a top-tier knight in full harness. There are archers, crossbowmen, militia, and men in partial plate or just mail. The poleaxe can meet that whole spectrum without needing to swap weapons. What ties all these parts together is control. A poleaxe is not just about raw power. The shaft gives you leverage for pushes and pulls, and the head design gives you multiple ways to threaten. And because there's useful metal at both ends, the weapon stays dangerous, even when the distance collapses and people are right on top of each other. Number 4. Details that matter. A poleaxe looks simple from far away, but the small build choices tell you what it's for. Start with the haft. Usually a tough hardwood like ash. Ash is springy, resists splitting, and takes shock well. The haft isn't just a stick. It's a carefully chosen piece of wood, with the grain running straight so it doesn't fail under impact. The head is steel, and the way it's attached matters. Many poleaxes use a socket or a langet and rivet system, so the head can't easily be twisted off. Langets are not decoration. They're armor for the weapon itself, protecting the wood where it's most likely to be hit. Some examples have langets running a good distance down the haft, pinned with multiple rivets, because fighters absolutely did target the shaft to disable pole weapons. Rondelles and hand stops also show up, because armored fighting involves close-range pressure. If two armored people crash in, the weapon can slide in the hands, and a simple guard plate can keep your hand from drifting toward the opponent's spikes. Some poleaxes also have a swell or grip shaping on the haft, helping you feel where your hands are without looking through a visor. Balance is another point people miss. A poleaxe is not supposed to feel like a heavy wood axe on a long handle. Many surviving pieces are compact and tight in the head, with enough mass to hit hard, but not so much that the weapon becomes slow.
A knight in armor needs a weapon that can change line fast, because openings appear and disappear in a second. There's also the status side. Poleaxes were often carried by men-at-arms, trained, well-equipped soldiers, and some were made as high-quality items with engraving, gilding, or fancy shaping. But even the flashy ones are still tools. The features that look good on a museum wall, clean lines, strong spikes, reinforced haft, are the same features that make sense in a fight. It's also useful to separate war gear from sporting gear. In tournaments and formal foot combats, the same basic weapon could be rebated, meaning edges and points were blunted, or the head was built in a safer configuration. The goal was still to win, but organizers wanted to reduce deaths and keep the event going. That's another hint that the poleaxe is central to a trained combat culture. It's a weapon people expected to use under rules, as well as in war. Number 5. Knights on foot, not just on horses. A lot of people imagine medieval knights as almost always mounted, charging with lances. That's real, but it's not the whole picture, especially once plate armor is everywhere. In many late medieval battles, the key action happens with armored men fighting on foot. Terrain, stakes, archers, and tight formations can make cavalry charges risky. Armored troops often dismount to fight as a solid line, using long weapons to control space and keep enemies from getting in among them. That's where the poleaxe makes sense. It's short enough to work in close crowds, but long enough to reach over and around. It fits the world of men-at-arms, professionals who trained, who had good armor, and who expected to meet other professionals. In that environment, weapons that can push, hook, and strike with concentrated force are valued more than weapons that only shine in one narrow scenario. A poleaxe also matches the way late medieval battles can break into pockets of close fighting. Once formations collide, people get stuck in mud, pressed by bodies or pinned against obstacles. A long spear can become awkward in that crush, but a compact polearm can still be worked with shorter motions and quick changes of grip. That practicality is easy to miss until you picture how crowded a real melee could be. Poleaxes also show up in settings that are less like chaotic battle and more like regulated combat. Late medieval Europe has a strong culture of formal foot combats, tournaments, challenges at barriers, and in some places, judicial duels. These events were not friendly, but they were structured with rules about armor and weapons. The poleaxe becomes a classic choice because it's designed for armored opponents, and because it allows a wide range of actions without needing a long run-up or a horse. This is why the poleaxe is often described as a knightly weapon. It sits in the same space as specialized armor, expensive, purpose-built, and tied to a social class that could afford training. That doesn't mean only nobles used it, but the weapon fits a professional fighting culture more than a quick levy of farmers. In big battles, poleaxes would have been mixed with other arms, spears, bills, halberds, swords, depending on region and period. But when you read accounts and look at art from the 1400s, the poleaxe keeps popping up around armored elites and bodyguards. It's the kind of weapon you carry when you expect the other side to be wearing steel, too. Number 6. What the fight manuals reveal. One of the best things about the poleaxe is that we can see how skilled people thought about it. Late medieval Europe leaves behind fight books, manuals, and illustrated treatises where masters explain combat systems. A lot of these sources treat the poleaxe as an armored weapon. That alone is a clue. It's not mainly about cutting cloth or scaring peasants. It's about dealing with another trained person in protection. You see it across regions.
Italian material, like Fiore de Liberi in the early 1400s, includes poleaxe play for armored contexts. German language Fechtbücher in the 1400s, including famous compilations associated with masters like Hans Talhofer, also depict armored poleaxe bouts. In French, Le Jeu de la Hache, usually dated to the 1400s, is basically a focused guide to armored axe fighting. Different languages, different art styles, same basic reality. Elites cared enough about this weapon to write systems down. These manuals don't read like, swing as hard as you can. They show a constant focus on distance, pressure, and control. When both fighters are armored, clean hits are harder to land, so the fight becomes a struggle for position. The illustrations and text repeatedly circle back to controlling space, shutting down the other person's options, and turning small advantages into decisive moments. Another theme is using the entire weapon. The top spike, the hammer, the axe, and the butt end all appear as active parts. The fighter doesn't treat the poleaxe as a single blade. It's closer to a system, different parts for different ranges. At longer range, the top point matters more. In closer range, the head and the shaft are used for pressure. At very close range, the butt spike and the haft become more important because the head can be jammed. The manuals also show how much armored fighting overlaps with wrestling. Once armor takes away easy cutting, getting a dominant grip, forcing a stumble, or controlling the opponent's balance becomes a major path to victory. The poleaxe helps with that because a pole is a lever. It's a handle you can brace against and move with your whole body, not just with your wrists. This is a good reality check against movie logic. In film, pole weapons are often shown as slow, huge, and mostly for big swings. The historical poleaxe is usually tighter and more compact, and the fighting style is about timing and positioning. It's brutal in what it can do, but it's also technical, and that's why it shows up in the teaching literature.
Number 7. How it stacks up against other weapons. The poleaxe is part of a bigger anti-armor toolbox. If you line it up next to a warhammer, a mace, a sword, and a spear, you can see why it became popular. A warhammer and a mace can deliver excellent, blunt impact, but they don't give you as much reach or as many options for hooking and controlling. A spear gives reach and strong thrusting, but it's more limited when the fight gets crowded and people are pressing close. A sword is still useful in the late Middle Ages, especially for thrusting into openings and for fighting lightly armored opponents. But a sword is a compromise weapon. Against full harness, it often relies on precision and on using the blade more like a short spear than like a cutting tool. That's why armored swordplay often shifts toward controlled thrusting and leverage rather than big cutting swings. The poleaxe leans into the anti-armor problem instead of compromising around it. Compared to an infantry halberd or bill, the poleaxe is more personal. Halberds and bills are great in formations, where the group keeps distance and the weapon's length becomes a wall. The poleaxe gives up some reach, but in return it becomes easier to handle in tight spaces, and it often has more hand protection and reinforcement for close contact. That suits the men-at-arms role, fighting shoulder to shoulder 1 minute, then in a messy clinch the next. It's also worth saying that medieval weapon names are messy. Modern labels like poleaxe, halberd, and bec de corbin are helpful, but real historical people often used local words that overlap. Some weapons sit right on the boundary between categories. Museums sometimes classify a head as poleaxe or pole hammer based on proportions, but the medieval user probably cared more about function than category. A quick myth-busting point fits here too.
Pop culture loves flails and giant spiked balls, but they're rare in the real record compared to practical, controllable weapons. Late medieval soldiers tended to prefer reliable tools they could train with and use in formation. The poleaxe looks dramatic, but it's dramatic because it's efficient, not because it's exotic. So the poleaxe isn't a weird one-off. It's a concentrated expression of the late medieval mindset. Build a tool that can hit hard, threaten gaps, control movement, and keep working even when the fight gets ugly and close. Number 8. From battlefield to museum. The poleaxe's peak is tied to the peak of plate armor. As gunpowder weapons spread and battlefield tactics shift in the 1500s, the full armored duel between elites becomes less central to warfare. Armor doesn't vanish, but it changes, and the all-purpose infantry pike and the firearm become more important than a compact dueling polearm. Poleaxes don't disappear instantly. You still see pole weapons in guard units and ceremonial contexts, and related weapons keep evolving, but the classic knightly poleaxe becomes less common over time. What survives today is a mix of original heads, restored weapons, and museum pieces where the wooden haft may be a replacement. Wood is perishable, so many medieval poleaxes survive as ironwork or as a head paired with a later shaft. That's why details like langets, sockets, and rivet patterns matter. They help curators and researchers reconstruct how the weapon was originally built, and they show which parts took the most stress. Modern reconstructions also show something important. These weapons are usually not gigantic. They're sized for armored humans, not for fantasy giants. The design is compact because it has to be quick and responsive. When people handle accurate replicas, they often notice how alive the weapon feels, stiff, balanced, and ready to change direction, more like a professional tool than a clumsy club. Because poleaxes are tied to fight books, they're also a big focus in modern historical martial arts research. People study the manuscripts, compare the art to surviving weapons, and then test interpretations with controlled, safety-focused practice using blunt training heads and protective gear. That modern work doesn't change the history, but it helps clear away bad assumptions and shows how sophisticated late medieval combat really was. Studying poleaxes is also a reminder that the Middle Ages wasn't one uniform moment. A late 1300s axe of arms, a mid-1400s armored poleaxe, and a guard weapon made for a princely household can look related, but not identical.
Surviving heads range from wide axe blades to almost all hammered designs, and even the shape of the top spike, the length of the socket, and the placement of langettes and rondels shift from region to region. That variety is what curators and researchers focus on when they try to pin down where a piece came from and what kind of fighting environment it was built for.